Hey, good morning.
Hey, Jadip, good morning.
We got the time right?
Yeah, I think people are running late. Hey, Rita.
Hey. Do y'all have anything to add to the agenda?
No, I think that sounds good to me. Yeah, let's cut the 312 today, if you're okay with it.
Sorry, what?
Let's cut the 312 today if you're okay with that.
Okay, sounds good.
It's 412, so.
Huh? 412?
Yeah, the date is 12.
Oh, don't scare me. We're not ready for another major version, yeah.
Yeah. We gotta match the month.
So only get 12 versions then.
Yes. Then it starts again.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike.
The 9 a.m. call is always like super slow, I guess, to
Yeah.
get started.
It's the Max's usual audio troubles.
Yeah. Are we waiting on anybody else?
I don't think so.
Shall we start?
Max, can you hear us? I think Max's audio is not working. We'll just take him as lazy consensus.
I don't think he's looking at chat also.
Can't hear you. You
need
can't
to,
hear us.
Sign language.
Max is the only one who makes morning calls fun. Like 9 a.m. calls. I don't think that happens. I think he does it on purpose.
I mean, we even use Teams. Nope,
Yeah.
can't hear you, Max. Do you want to join from your phone?
All right. Does this? Okay. Wow. Somehow the Zoom mic selector said same as system, but was not being same as system.
Mm.
I don't know what that was. Sorry.
Is this because of the Zoom, like the web app for Chrome?
I have no clue. It's like some combination of my Chrome box, whether I like try to rearrange the cables such that my audio interface isn't plugged into the Chrome box, which is kind of annoying because then I need to like unplug my speakers, plug them into a different device, right? Then my other monitor doesn't always turn on, right? So I need to like unplug and replug that. And I think I had the audio working until I did that bit. So yeah, apologies. It is super irritating.
On that note,
And then my cat tries to scratch my monitor.
are we? All right, so sounds like we're cutting 312 today. Yay. Come on. Yay. Okay. All right. I'm always like the one that's providing entertainment value. It's fine.
I mean, it was
right.
Max's audio troubles. The entertainment.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Are you
all right.
not entertained, Rita?
Huh?
Are you not entertained?
I was like the first 5 times, but
Now you're just annoyed. Yeah.
now it's just like, come on.
This is a rite of passage. This is just like how we start the meetings.
Yeah. Jay, do you want to talk about yours first? Because I think the KubeCon slides might take a little bit of time. I just want to give you time because it sounds like you're trying to get some agreement, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Max left a comment on PR a couple of weeks ago. I'm sorry, I've been slow to respond to that. But essentially what you suggested was that system should handle batch publishing code rather than driver, right? So that means we bear the responsibility of implementing that structure, whereas if we are trying to define an interface or a driver, we can just say that whatever the underlying tool you are trying to use supports, we will support, and not bear the responsibility of managing this extra mechanism. Is that reasonable?
Sorry, I lost the thread a little bit. Were you agreeing or disagreeing with the idea that the pub subsystem abstracts away basically everything, right? As the caller calls publish batch or publish on the system and doesn't care about the actual capabilities of the driver. So,
that part I agree with, that caller shouldn't care, but the part where you mentioned that pub subsystem should have the logic of calling publish method or supporting batch publishing when underlying broker doesn't, or underlying provider tool doesn't, that part I do not like. I kind of disagree with, because if we are trying to define an interface, we can just say that whatever the tool supports, we will support, and we do not go out of our way to implement such mechanism, because it just doesn't stop there, right? We have to think of edge cases and implement the stuff like partial, what happens in partial success, retry logics and things like that. Rather, we should depend on what PubSub tool supports, because all of these things will be available on any full-scale tool, right?
The problem is those two statements are mutually exclusive, right? Like either the caller cares about the tool, right? Because they need to care about whether the tool supports, say, batch publishing, or they don't care about the tool, in which case if the caller doesn't support batch publishing, then the pub subsystem needs to polyfill that functionality, right? Like there's no middle ground there. Either you're testing the capabilities of the individual driver as a caller, or you're not, right? So like, it's fine if we want to say, let's just not handle batch publishing in the short term. But if the point is to have an abstraction layer, then we should, treat that seriously, right? And basically that means that anytime we are querying anything as a caller below the pub subsystem, we failed in our abstraction, right? It's leaked.
Yeah. I mean, from caller's perspective, it does seem like having batch publish completes the abstraction layer, but at the same time, from gatekeeper's perspective, all we are trying to do is define a way to onboard and plug and play any provider to use PubSub, right? So in that case, we might better be off relying on the mechanism provided by the tools that we are trying to integrate rather than defining it ourselves if they don't support it.
Except the point of having the abstraction is to unify the interface, the practice of interfacing with those tools, right? So basically then, if there's a new tool added that we want to support, right? And the canonical example we've been using is, well, we've been using Dapper, and now we want to use RabbitMQ, Redis MQ, what have you, or Redis Q, I forget the name of it. You only have to modify very minimal pieces of the code, right? And if you integrate the tools directly, which is what you're suggesting, right? Because you basically are saying it's better if the caller deals with these tools directly, then anytime you add a new tool, the potential is there to need to update every place that tool is used, right? So that's going to be an audit, that's going to be in the webhook, that's going to be probably in Gator. If there's other third-party integrations with the constraint framework, right, they're going to need to do their own actions, right, in order to be compatible. So
I think there is some misunderstanding. I'm not saying particular individual places should know whether publish batch is supported or not. I'm just saying that instead of writing batching logic in system, PubSub system, we should delegate it to driver, or that responsibility should be taken upon driver author, as in they can write publish batching on their own. We will just provide a way to call that function, just because, I mean, if there is a gap and they want to backfill it by writing their own mechanism, it's fine. We should not be taking responsibility of if a user chooses a provider or tries to write a driver with a that utilizes a provider that do not support batch publishing, then we should not take responsibility of writing that mechanism in our system.
yeah, so I what you're saying is I got it backwards, that the it's not the user or the caller we're putting the responsibility on, it's the driver author.
Yeah.
Maybe. I think I'm fine with doing that to start with, right? Because the cost, if we decide to go backwards there, is essentially like, if we're requiring all drivers to implement publish batch, right, which is the consequence of what you're suggesting, then yeah, there's another method in our driver interface. If we decide later on that's not necessarily, excuse me, we can actually polyfill this, and we get rid of that method from our interface, previously written drivers will still satisfy the simplified interface, right?
Yeah.
The converse is not true, right? If we decide we no longer want to support publish batch because it's too hard, that doesn't work in a backwards compatible way. So I think it's reasonable from an MVP perspective. I do question whether you'll actually find different solutions for the publish batch stuff. And the reason why I have that is just looking at Dapper, right? And their design proposal for clients that don't support batch publishing is to basically do what we were doing. But because you can walk this back, we can walk what you're suggesting back easier than what I'm suggesting. I think that makes sense as an MVP.
Yeah, okay. The another reason is also that, I mean, we can just provide batching, right? And then it's up to the driver at this point to whether implement it or not. If it is not supported, it's a choice that they can make, rather than we enforcing our own logic of publish batch, right?
I maybe lost the thread here, because the implications of what you're saying is that it stops being a choice whether the driver implements publish batch and starts being a requirement.
I mean, they simply can not implement and just use publish as well, right? Whatever the
They
tool
can't.
that-
They can't, because that breaks the caller then, right? So if I'm a caller, remember the whole goal of the pub subsystem is to abstract the caller, right? So the caller doesn't care what driver it's using, it has the same surface, right? So let's say we have a caller that wants to use publish batch, right? And there is some driver that doesn't implement publish batch, right? And that caller happens to be making that call for that particular driver. There are 3 possible ways that scenario can play out. You can either do what you're suggesting, which is say, well, we don't, as pub subsystem, polyfill publish batch, and also the drivers aren't required to implement it, in which case this driver will not support publish batch, and the caller's call will either fail or they need to take a different action because of the driver they're using, right? In which case the abstraction has failed. Or the driver, the pub sub system is polyfilling driver, in which case it will work, but we're in that situation that you don't want to be in right now, which is like dealing with these edge cases, right? You'd rather put that in the driver. The third would be if the driver, like, it's not possible for a driver not to support batch publishing, regardless of whether the underlying pub sub mechanism supports it or not, right? And in that case, things work, but the premise that there's a driver that doesn't support batch publishing is invalid.
Can this be a feature flag? So once it's on, then, or sorry, maybe not a feature flag, but like a driver flag that tells you that if you need to validate it or not, to ensure that driver should have that implemented?
Like the client needs to be aware in either way in that case, right? Like if it's possible to have drivers that don't have a universal surface area, either the client stays away from those functions that aren't universal, or it needs to test the capabilities of the particular driver it's using before it calls the system. Right. So basically, in this case, either no one uses publish batch,
Right.
or
yeah. I mean, yeah. So your point is like, because it's optional, it's hard for the client to validate.
Well, basically, the point is that the idea of making it optional and the idea that the pub subsystem abstracts away calls to various pub sub clients are mutually exclusive concepts.
Sure.
The
Okay,
other
so
option is to not support publish batch like at all, right? That's a thing. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, for the MVP, I guess like Jay, do you think we need it?
It would be nice to have as a full, like more complete functionality, because we know for sure in future, at least with Dapper, like there are some providers that support batching, so it would be nice to offer that as well. And it will help reduce the throughput of messages getting delivered as well. There are two benefits we are letting go if we don't include it in MVP.
I mean, I guess maybe another way to say is like, I think you're right. It's a better integration with Dapper to have it. But given that your PR is it's already
Yeah.
really big,
Yeah.
wonder if we could just get the baseline in, and then you can add the batch stuff as a follow-up,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't
I'm
have to be together. Like it shouldn't be, right?
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, cool. I'm just taking some notes. By the way, did you guys, were you able to see my screen with the notes?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share again. I was thinking maybe for future. By the way, Davis, I think we can hear you. I don't know if you want to mute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I figured you didn't know. I was thinking like for future meetings, we could like one of us could share the notes just so that as things are discussed, as decisions are captured, we all see what is written down. That's what we see in other community calls as well. Okay, can be a follow. Sounds good. Okay. Anything else for this, Jay?
No, nothing else.
Okay, cool. All right, with that, are y'all okay with moving to the next topic? Okay, I also want to solicit some feedback for the KubeCon EU slides. And Charlie has been working on the OPA slides, but specific for the gatekeeper ones. So my plan originally was to show these two, like discuss in more details as far as like, hey, what is a signed image, and what is the significance of the multi-engine support that was added to the framework, right? I believe I did send for some feedback to some folks, but not everybody. So I guess before we go into these slides, do folks have any thoughts about showing this? And the reason I ask is I like this feature a lot, but as I understand it, you would have to specify a specific container name. So I don't know how widely applicable that is. And is this something we want to demo?
So I think there is one use case I can think of that I don't know how common it is, but probably exists, where a company has a trusted repository that all images must be downloaded from.
Mhm. Yeah,
whether
but
it's
that's like all or nothing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty dangerous.
Pretty dangerous to
Yeah.
do an all or nothing trusted.
I mean, because you're assuming every image repo has a mirror essentially at the same path, right?
Right. Like this would be a company whose like security posture basically is that, right? Like we want to 100% control the sourcing of our binaries because
Right.
we trust us and no one else. So,
what I mean is the assumption is the one that we're replacing and the one that the value we're replacing, they have the same, essentially same path.
Oh, no, that's not necessarily true. The replaced value needs to be identical the value it is replaced with, I should say, needs to be
Right.
identical.
Right.
The input value could be whatever. That just gets clobbered.
I think we're saying the same thing. That's what I mean. We're assuming that the paths are identical and all you need to do is just replace the registry.
Right. If you have a trusted build system. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I guess I could just mention the assumption and then say if you had it set up that way, then you could use this to mutate.
Yeah. We could also use it as like a gauge of interest, right? Because even if it is underfeatured for most people because you can't do this targeting, the solution to that I can think of right now is to extend the location syntax to allow filtering, right? Only container names with this prefix or whatever. Not images, right? Because images that would allow for infinite recursion. The one risk I could see there is because, oh shoot, I need to update that bug. I'll do that. But there is discussion in the K8s community about an embedded mutation service, right? And it would be good to know what that looks like so we could figure out, one, whether it's better just to do mutation there whenever that comes out, or two, if some sort of like hybrid footprint makes sense, like it currently does for validation, then Gatekeeper will have a very specific role for mutation, right? And probably we should be designing around that. But there's like an ignorance issue right now where we don't know what the final K8s thing will look like, so we can't know where we land in relationship to it.
Right, right. Okay, that was a lot.
Sorry.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to process it because I don't want to, like, the point of these talks, right, is to make sure people are aware of like the latest and greatest, and then make sure that they understand why this is applicable to them, so then they can use it, right? So in this case, I think we should make sure people are aware of the new assign image feature, and then they know how to use it, right? So I think, can y'all read this? Is it too small?
Can we say we're like looking for feedback?
Yeah, I mean, all the new features, I will say that.
Okay.
Right, like including multi-engine and all the other like stuff, right? But specifically for assign image, I think it's good to address like the elephant in the room, right? Meaning I want to show it off and say, hey, assuming you have the path the same way and they're all available in like between the source registry and this destination registry, then you could use this for it, right? But if you have like more explicit logic, then this is not it for you.
Yeah,
right?
I think mirrored images for like an enterprise would be a good showcase.
Okay, right.
Like your enterprise or company is mirroring everything, and instead of you must pull it from that registry.
Yeah, and mirrors are pretty likely to have the same path.
Right. Okay. So I think, again, I think that's a good way to show it. And then I could just briefly mention there's also a discussion that's happening for an in-process mutation emission controller in API machinery. I think that I'll just leave it as that. Sounds good? Okay. Davis, do you have any thoughts about this? Because I think this is the one you added. I just want to make sure I cover all the bases that you want to be covered.
No, I think what you said sounds reasonable.
Okay. All right. So other than these two, is there anything else in this list that y'all think we should go in more depth? And keep in mind, Gatekeeper gets like half of the time, right? So maybe like 20 minutes or 15 minutes max. because the talk is both for OPA and gatekeeper, right? Yeah. Okay. Right now I think this is okay, but if you can think of other ones that you want to make sure we demo or call out, please let me know. With that, so this is a placeholder for a sign image, and then let's dive into multi-engine support. So this is the plan is to kind of talk about the motivations, right? Why do we work on the multi-engine support? I think there's been a lot of tweets and discussions in the community around with validating emission policy feature as an alpha feature in 126. What does that mean, and when do I use it versus something like Gatekeeper or any other validating webhook, right? For policies. So here's just like a sort of a quick bullet list. Any thoughts, questions?
The one thing that's interesting here is we should highlight probably that use of the library will translate or be able to translate into use of validating admission policy. Like, you don't need to literally use the K8s CellCap resources in order to be using in-tree admission. Because I could see that being a point of confusion, right?
I think that's probably this slide.
Yeah, I mean, probably it is in there. I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay.
That's something we want to really, yeah.
I think that's sort of this, I guess. Together.
Well, kind of, but what I'm saying is that if all you have are constraints and templates, right, that you don't write any policy definitions, but you migrate the templates to using the CellCap stuff, then you're still using in-tree admission, right? Just because we have this language driver doesn't mean that the webhook is always going to go through Gatekeeper.
Yes, I think we're saying, I'm trying to think where is the best place to add that. Because this is sort of the motivations, right? Whereas what you're saying is sort of like, oh, here's what you get with this, right?
Right, and basically what's prompting me to talk right now is I see in that slide 25, the risk, or maybe more how you were talking about it, the risk is that someone just hearing that will go, okay, well, I should create constraints and templates for these types of resources, and I should create policy definitions and whatever those other ones are, bindings for these other types of policies. And, you know, I just want to highlight that that's not true, right? That you're not, based on the type of resources you choose to create, that's not what selects which webhook you're using.
Right, but that's only possible because of this, right? If this didn't exist, this is right.
Right. So there's two stories here, I think. There's the how, right, and the what we're doing, and the extra like sugar on top. And there's the big TLDR for users who are just who are only hearing, okay, when do I use Gatekeeper? When do I use validating admission policy?
Sure.
Right. And we want to probably say, yes, you should use validating admission policy where you can, but using validating admission policy doesn't mean you need to create validating admission policy resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know.
That's kind of hard to explain in the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that's the whole point of this, right? Which is saying, and I think your point though is this is the current state of things, but we want to be able to sort of leverage the best of both worlds, right? So I think that's so I think maybe end with a question like, oh, is there a way I can get both?
Yeah. Like, so basically, and my point isn't, oh, this slide needs another bullet. It's more like a framing point of, I don't want people to miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
I like that. I like that. You can even do this in like a Venn diagram, maybe. So like put them separate, and then you can like combine them or something like that. You can do like a fancy animation.
Okay, maybe later. I think I get your point, Sir Taj. I think I could look into that kind of stuff later, but right now I'm more concerned about
I get it.
Right. Again, the motivation is here's the state of the world. This is the benefits of each, separately. But is there a way, we could get the best of both worlds? And I think that's what I heard from you, Max, is let's make sure we highlight this, basically, right? Okay.
Yeah,
I like that framing.
Are we good with this slide, basically? And obviously, I'll share the link, in case you don't have it already, and feel free to add comments, and take your time. I don't want to rush it either.
One quick comment. Do you want to put referential like policies or?
It's here.
Yeah, no. I mean, should we just, instead of just saying referential?
Oh, I see. Sure. Okay, anything else?
I'm a big fan of visuals. I'm not sure, like, is this the final state of the slides?
No. No, this is just gathering feedback for content. And then if I have time, and that's a big if, then I go back and make it prettier. But again, I want to make sure the content is good first.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but in terms of visual, what did you have in mind? Venn diagram?
No, I was thinking maybe there's a way to showcase like how you can use the constraint framework in Gatekeeper versus in the validating emission policy versus using K8s resources in the validating emission policy.
If only there's a slide following this.
Oh no, sorry.
No. Great. I love it because that means this question is piquing your interest. Yay. Okay. So with that in mind, let's keep going. And let me know after I've shown like maybe I think there's like 5, 6 slides. After all the slides, if it still doesn't address what you're saying, please let me know. Okay. All right. So we're done with the motivations. And then we're going to talk about like why we're doing this, the coexistence, like by having multi-engine support as part of constraint framework, we're able to get the multi-language, multi-target, and making sure the policies are portable between various implementations. And obviously I want to call out the core constraint template and constraint functionalities are already in Gatekeeper. And then again, adding multiple engines to the framework to enable more integrations with other engines on top of OPA. And then together with Gatekeeper and Gator CLI, we can leverage audit and shift left validation for free. And then examples for multi-engines, obviously Kubernetes validating emission policy based on cell, and then Starlark. All right, any questions about this slide?
What is Starlark?
It's in that issue. I'm not going to try to explain it because
it's a language. It's great. It'll solve all your problems.
The point is, for the next thing, we are covered. Okay.
I see basil in there, and that kind of scares me.
What? You don't like basil?
Who likes basil?
I'm kidding, dude. All right. Moving on. I'm rushing a bit because I want to make sure I get to all. But please raise your hand or stop me if you want to talk about anything. So first we want to talk about the multi-engine. What does that mean? and what does it do, right? So as part of the constraint schema, as part of the template, as y'all know, we have where the actual enforcement logic lives. And this is where the engine is going to be called to evaluate that code, all right? And then again, this is also where the source code lives in terms of, and then the engine will use the source code to do the actual evaluation. And then obviously today we have OPA, and then we'll add other engines as well. Other questions about this? No, okay. Then we'll talk about the target and enforcement point. So an example of a target is something like an emission webhook like Gatekeeper. And this is again taking a look at constraint templates and constraints. As you can see, this is where we define the match criteria. And then the emission webhook will also be able to give us information like what does the actual review object look like and what kind of metadata do I have. And then for enforcement points, this is also where we say, hey, how do I what kind of enforcement action do I want to apply? And this is again where constraints come in. And then what response do I send to the actual enforcement points? Any questions about this? I honestly, I do feel like these are like pretty deep dive. I don't know if I want to keep it honestly, but again, it's the core of constraint framework, so it might be good to let me know what you think, I guess. Moving on, so the future, right? The vision here is having Gatekeeper as a front end for all Kubernetes policies. And here, as you can see, with constraints and templates, these are, again, you guys already know this, very familiar. This is where we define the constraint policy CRs, right? And when Gatekeeper controller evaluates these, if engine is Kubernetes validation, then it actually creates the validating emission policy binding and validating emission policy resources. And this is, again, Kubernetes emission control policy resources, right? And this is the one that that's in tree or in process. Any questions about this? I think this should address what you were asking, Alex.
I think I commented on the thing. It might be confusing if we call the engine K8s validation, because that would sound like the OPA does not do K8s validation. I do understand the intent of it, but I think it might be confusing to folks if they don't know the differences.
Yeah, but it is actually the Kubernetes validation.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. It is maybe we could call it like in-tree validation or something like that.
Whereas the other engine is actually OPA.
Yeah. So that's why it's an in-tree validation or something to that effect.
Probably not literally in tree, just because we should mention K8s in the name somewhere.
Yeah, I'm not like strong opinion. I'm just saying that could be confusing to folks because OPA, I mean, the
Maybe
resulting will also do
in
Kubernetes
process,
validation.
like in tree. Also, unless you're like Kubernetes dev, you want to understand that. Like I'm not sure. I'm saying like,
built-in validation. K8s built-in validation.
Always built in. K8s native validation.
Yeah,
I don't know. Is native?
I don't know.
An okay word to use?
Or in the CAP we mentioned in process a lot, right?
In the CAP we do, yeah. Like
so can we say in process, is that clear enough?
I think that's very jargony relative to K8s validation and not strictly accurate, because if you have other places you're running it, like it's not going to be like in which process if you're running it in Gator, right?
I'm okay with native if y'all are okay with it.
K native, K8s native.
Oh God, please don't start. Okay, anyway, good enough for now. If you have objections, please raise your hand or yeah.
I don't have a naming objection here. I just wanted to ask, like, in this slide, do you think it would be powerful to have like because we're showing a worldview here of how gatekeeper can be used with the validating admission policy from K8s. Should we show a world where gatekeeper is not used and highlight like why that world sucks, if that makes sense?
You mean like why use native versus gatekeeper?
Like what would it look like if we use the native for a user? Like I'm not sure, Max, if
I'm
earlier.
attempting to do that in this slide.
Okay, never mind. Sorry.
No. Let me explain this, and then you tell me if that addresses what you're asking.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so with this slide, we are focusing on what happens when an admission request is made, right? Keep in mind, this is gatekeeper controller is the front end, right? So we now have both constraints and constraint templates that have both engines, right? Both native and OPA Rego, right? So with that in mind, when an admission request comes in, if the cluster has validating admission policy and binding resources, which it does because we just created it, or gatekeeper just created it, then it will go through its normal thing where if the request does not meet the rules, the rules defined in this policy resource, then it will get rejected. All right. And then similarly, for because the gatekeeper validating webhook is running in the cluster, the same request will go through the gatekeeper validating webhook, right? And then it will go through its own constraints and constraint templates. And then for the ones that have engine Kubernetes native, it would just skip it, right? Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think like what I was curious to get at before is like if I'm new to this whole space, like let's say I don't know much about gatekeeper, like I kind of know what it is, and I see the slide, I think my mind goes to like, cool, now I can do this natively in Kubernetes. Like it would be cool to be able to show like, hey, if you don't use us, like you might have to create all these resources yourself and things like that. And maybe this is out of the scope for this talk.
No, that's a really good point. I can try to find better constraints and template as examples instead of like image repo must be company X. So for example, the Ingress unique Ingress hostname might be a good one here, right? For again, why you want to use gatekeeper and why currently the K8s native one does not do it, right? So I'll update this. That's a really good feedback, Alex. Meaning depending on the policy, you may need to create these, in which case gatekeeper will just go through its regular thing. And if not, then gatekeeper could still be the front end where it manages both of these policies for you.
It might make sense to put 30 before this, so like a before view, and then how gatekeeper can help.
Yeah.
Like without, it's kind of confusing because there's just two arrows, and then
the reason why I was thinking about this first is because you don't know gatekeeper created these guys, right? But to your point, like without gatekeeper, you're doing this yourself. And then you also don't get the shift left stuff, right? So actually, okay, so that's a good feedback. So I could move this up and just say, here's the experience you get today, right? Where you're managing these native things, and then you don't get the audit, you don't get the referential, you don't get the shift left. But with Gatekeeper creating the resources for you, then you get those for free. Does that work?
Yeah, I think that'll be cool to see. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then I'll update this to make it more clear about it. And then there's also the audit piece, right? So as we said, by having Gatekeeper, we get audit for free. Well, what does that look like, right? So for audit, for Gatekeeper audit, it will basically call the API server, get all the resources as well as all the constraint templates and constraints. And then for the engine that's using Rego, it will obviously call the OPA driver, but for the Kubernetes native ones, it will call the native driver. And then again, it will continue to watch and replicate based on your configurations. Clear? Feedback? Okay. If nothing else, this is the last slide. So what is next, right? People want to know what is coming. So things we want to look at next are migration, right? Between these different engines, we want to make sure it's with minimal changes. People can migrate between the two, bring the native validation to audit, shift left, update Gatekeeper library to support the native base policies, support the base policies for older Kubernetes versions, right? With Gatekeeper, you could do that. You don't even need to run on a 126 plus cluster, yay. Gator support for ROC native validation based rules and constraint templates, right? So meaning in the future, you could actually use a CLI to also validate the Kubernetes native resources without having to, in addition to the constraint templates, right? And then other engines, obviously. Questions about this?
Migration, that sort of sounds like it's like a mandatory sort of thing.
What do you mean?
Like a migration with minimal changes. So I mean, if somebody doesn't want to migrate, they don't have to. Like they're both be supported paths.
Well, it's an ability to migrate with minimal changes.
Yeah, do we want to say that? Like
Instead of migration, adoption of?
Yeah, something like, because migrations kind of sounds like they have to do it.
Is that better? Or enable? Ability to migrate?
I think Max suggested adoption. That might
What
be
does
it.
that mean?
Like you want to adopt the native enforcement
Instead of migration.
versus you have to adopt.
Yeah.
So adoption with minimal changes?
Yeah, well, I would say adopt native policy with minimal changes, or start using, or, I'm not married to adopt, but I get the point that Surtash is saying, like migration.
It's going to be a scary word.
A triggering word. What's
yeah.
Gotcha.
Because that sounds like they have to do some work for there's going to be some migration thing. There's like
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, yeah, I think that's a better word. Yeah, makes sense. Anything else here? Okay, if not, do you think I should remove these two? I don't know if they're adding too much value now that I'm reading it out loud, because it's very detailed.
Keep them in your back pocket if someone asks a question, maybe.
Okay. but just don't show it maybe.
Yeah.
That's fair. Anything else? Does this make sense to you? Do we want to, am I missing anything?
Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks for
I
putting
think that a lot of people are going to ask about this anyway. So, oh, sorry, Alex, you were saying?
No, thanks for putting those together.
Thanks. Okay, and we're at time. Sorry, I was like rushing y'all a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your feedback. I'll update and then share the link shortly. Right. Right. Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Miss Mac. Miss Mac.